All right, well, let's get to our decode segments because today I actually want to talk about the issue of representation, something that we've been hearing quite a bit about, especially when it comes to Biden's cabinet. But there's one group of people that doesn't seem to get any representation. In fact, they're dissuaded from representing working people, people living in poverty, and it's definitely an issue as more and more Americans slip into poverty during this pandemic. So let's get to it. It's not only extremely rare to find American politicians who want to represent the best interests of working Americans. When it comes to corporate media, it's even rarer. And nothing made that clearer than how Stephanie Ruhle handled her interview with Bernie Sanders on the topic of poverty during the pandemic. Watch.
The American people, the working people are now experiencing unemployment high. We have a record level of hunger in America. Millions of people are facing evictions. This is an emergency. Congress has got to respond aggressively to help working families. You know, Stephanie, I always get a kick. Here in Washington, when we go to war, there's endless amounts of money. Tax breaks for billionaires, endless amounts of money. Corporate welfare, endless amounts of money. When children are going hungry in America today, suddenly we don't have enough money. That's crap. That's wrong. And if we have got to stay here throughout Christmas, which is the last thing in the world that I would want to do, we are going to stay here because we are going to make sure that struggling working families in this country get the help they desperately need.
Senator, I'm not agreeing with you fundamentally, but I want to talk to you practically. You've been the lead sponsor of 422 bills during your 30 years in Congress, but only 7 of them have become law. Given that record and how dire things are, as you just laid out, do you need to find another lane or take a different approach here?
Now, I guess we shouldn't be surprised that someone who worked in the financial industry for 14 years would handle the interview the way that she did. It's laughable that people like Stephanie Ruhle prance around as so-called journalists when in reality, their worldview couldn't be further than what average Americans, average people are facing and experiencing on a daily basis. She does not represent them. She doesn't actually do journalism to cover them appropriately. And, you know, in 1997, for instance, she joined Credit Suisse, where she spent 6 years working in hedge fund sales. Eventually, she was the vice president of Credit Suisse First Boston, where she became the highest producing credit derivative salesperson in the United States. Then she went on to work for Donald Trump's dumbest lender, Deutsche Bank. And of course, her career culminated with a hosting shot over at MSNBC, where she spreads disinformation about the realities that poor people are facing in this country. But I'd love to answer her question about why Bernie Sanders supposedly was not successful in the bills that he proposed during his political career. It's because the economic identities of most congressional lawmakers, individuals that he is supposed to negotiate and work with, are nothing like the identities of people that they're supposed to be representing. And if you're wondering, what am I talking about? This video will explain it for you a little bit.
It turns out, for the first time in U.S. history, the majority of its lawmakers are millionaires. In 2012, of the 535 members of Congress, 268, or more than half, had a net worth of more than $1 million. That's up more than 4% from the previous recorded year.
What we're losing are people who will feel an obligation to speak for the working class and the lower middle class and the poor, because fewer and fewer people in Congress know what it's like to actually be poor.
So hunger during this pandemic has been absolutely devastating, to the point where shoplifting has gone up. But people aren't shoplifting electronics and televisions or anything like that. They're shoplifting bread, pasta, and items for their children, which demonstrates how desperate this situation is getting as Congress fails to pass another round of stimulus. It's really bad. And again, I want to re-emphasize just how wealthy members of Congress are.
That's a lot, because when you think about the rest of the population, only about 3% of us can call ourselves millionaires. And look who has all the money in Congress. Leading the list is Darrell Issa from California, a Republican with a net worth of $464 million. You can go to Virginia to find the top Democrat, Mark Warner, $257 million. And another Democrat is in third, Jared Polis from Colorado, with $197 million.
That's a lot of white men. What about women? When are women going to get represented in Congress? This is wrong. Okay. As a woman, I demand to see other females in Congress, and preferably, females who have a ton of money and a vested interest in deregulation and pro-corporate policy. So that list was actually from 2014. Why don't we look at current times to see where Congress stands when it comes to their wealth? So don't worry, ladies, we got that representation we so desperately wanted with Kelly Loeffler. Senator Kelly Loeffler, or Loeffler, however you pronounce her name, is estimated to be worth more than $500 million. And if that's the case, Loeffler is by far the wealthiest member of Congress. And remember, she was essentially appointed in that position as senator. She was not elected. She is running in a re-election bid in Georgia, as we all know, and hopefully she gets voted out. But she is followed by other members of Congress, including Senator Rick Scott, who's worth $259 million, Senator Mark Warner, $214 million, and Representative Greg Gianforte, $189 million. So is it really surprising that our congressional lawmakers are unwilling to work with Bernie Sanders to pass economic policies that would at least help address the issue of inequality in America? Is it surprising that they failed to reach another stimulus package at a time when Americans are desperate for financial relief? And really, we should be calling it financial relief, because so many people right now are worried about eviction. They're worried about putting food on the table for themselves and their families. They're worried about their livelihoods, and they've been abandoned by these millionaires who have no interest in actually representing them. And we don't have discussions about proper representation for working Americans. We do have representation about aesthetics. We do have conversations about what we need to do to have diversity, for instance, in Congress, in government, and to be sure, diversity is important. I do believe that our elected leaders and members of the federal government and the executive branch should at least reflect the diversity that we see here in the United States. The point of this story, the point of this Decode segment, is to point to the fact that what our elected leaders are doing right now is they're just simply tokenizing representation as opposed to implementing diversity with the policies and with the ideologies that actually do represent working Americans. And so, yes, I've been thinking about representation quite a bit lately, especially when it comes to Joe Biden's cabinet. Now, he's been pressured quite a bit in order to represent various groups of people, whether it's women, the African-American community. He's also getting pressure from the Asian community as well. But again, I want to emphasize, this is the community that needs representing.
Over the past decade, average household incomes have declined, while rents have been rising. And that's pushing more and more people, like Carla Powers, to the edge.
So what happened to you today?
I was at work. I work 2 full-time jobs. I'm trying. It's a struggle, and it's real, and it's hard. Seriously, yes.
How hard has it been to find housing out here?
Horrible. It's freaking horrible. Yeah. And that's how I ended up in this slum. I didn't want to be here. I didn't want to be here. I don't have horrible credit, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. But it's just hard.
In Dallas and elsewhere, we kept hearing how the largest of the programs, Section 8 vouchers, covers just a fraction of those in need.
Section 8 applications. Thousands of residents have been fighting for a chance to get public housing assistance.
When the vouchers are handed out, the response is overwhelming.
Chaos this morning in the parking lot as tempers flared over the city's plan to hand out the Section 8 applications.
Some people have been here since Sunday morning, Monday morning. It's ridiculous.
The voucher pays the difference between the monthly rent and what renters can afford. More than 2 million households use them, but wait lists can be years long.
So who is demanding that Biden appoint or nominate cabinet members who actually genuinely want to address that issue. And as you can see from that video, that was a pretty diverse group of people. And as we know from statistics, poverty disproportionately impacts people of color in the United States. Simply nominating someone who happens to be a person of color doesn't go far enough in representing the best interests of these communities unless they actually identify with and want to address the economic frustrations and concerns that these people are having, the actual real world experiences these people are having. Simply having the aesthetics of change is not enough. And of course, we get, in my opinion, goofball stories that have excerpts like the one I'm about to read. And of course, people are going to get upset that I'm going to read this and refer to it, but I think you're going to get my point at least. So the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, known as CAPAC, pointed out in a statement that this could be the first time since the Clinton administration that Asian American and Pacific Islanders can be shut out from occupying a secretary role in the executive cabinet, a development the lawmakers called unacceptable. Okay, that's fine. I'm definitely open to having as diverse a cabinet as humanly possible. But are all Asians the same? Are all Black people the same? Are all Mexicans the same? Is everyone the same in any group? So can we have a discussion about who's qualified? Can we have a discussion about specific people and how they would significantly benefit the lives of Americans? Or are we just simply having a conversation about a job grab within Biden's cabinet? It's ridiculous because the conversation is shallow and does not address real concerns that Americans are facing right now. Anyway, while it is laudable to have an executive branch that reflects the diversity of the United States, oftentimes these nominees do fall short of actually representing the best interests of the people they purport to relate to. Take Avril Haines, for example, a woman who is now the first woman actually to be nominated for Director of National Intelligence. Fantastic. Now, as a woman, am I excited that there's a woman nominated for this position? Honestly, I don't really care, but I know that a lot of women do. But how about we take a look at her record as someone who's going to have such an incredibly important role within the intelligence community? First of all, she was the architect behind Obama's disastrous drone policy, which killed an estimated, and I know this is an underestimate, of 542 civilians. 542 civilians dead as a result of Obama's drone policy, which again, Avril Haines was the architect of. She also vouched for Gina Haspel, who has been accused of attempting to cover up CIA torture. And, I want to read you her statement about Gina Haspel. She had said in 2018 when Donald Trump had nominated her, Gina Haspel is intelligent, compassionate, and fair. Gina has an unparalleled understanding of the institution, the agency's work, and she will support the workforce, all attributes the agency needs as its director. Yes, but how about the fact that she tried to destroy evidence regarding CIA torture, which was illegal? What about the fact that she was totally on board with CIA torture? Does that matter? No. Does it matter that Avril Haines, again, a woman, fantastic, was supportive of this kind of stuff? I guess it doesn't. I guess we're not allowed to have an in-depth look at what these people genuinely represent. She also engaged in other questionable work. Haines has in the past described herself as a former consultant for the controversial data mining firm Planeteer. Haynes's biography page at the Brookings Institute, where she is listed as a non-resident senior fellow, boasted of this affiliation until last week when it suddenly no longer appeared on the page. Oh, that's really weird. Why? I mean, why would she brag about that in the past and then all of a sudden it's gone? It's deleted from the Brookings Institute page. Well, co-founded by the far right, Trump-supporting tech billionaire Planeteer, whose business has benefited from a slew of government contracts, has been accused of aiding in the Trump administration's immigration detention programs in the United States and helping the Trump administration build out its surveillance state. But it's okay. We can forget about all of that because she's a woman. And so since she's a woman, of course, she's going to do more to represent the best interests of women in this country, right? Or abroad. Yeah, I doubt it. And to be fair, she's not the only female member of the Democratic Party who loves to support the military and the surveillance state. If you go back to Congress for a moment, some news broke this week regarding Kyrsten Sinema, who is a Democrat, and how she's definitely in cahoots with Donald Trump in regard to the sale of weapons, as was tweeted recently. Arizona Democrat Sinema and Kelly vote to pass Trump's huge arms deal for the UAE, breaking with their party and ensuring the package will survive the Senate. And I love the responses to it. One person responded with, "Glad that we have moved past old men with white hair selling arms to dictatorships to bisexual women in purple wigs selling arms to dictatorships." One other person commented, "We're going to bomb the shit out of countries, but with a diverse cabinet." Fantastic. Now, Biden also nominated General Lloyd Austin as his Secretary of Defense, which is definitely a problem because he retired pretty recently in 2016, less than 7 years ago. Now, as CNN reported, Austin would need a congressional waiver to be confirmed for the civilian post because he retired from active duty service only 4 years ago. Federal law requires 7 years of retirement from active duty before taking on the role. Yeah, but whatever. I mean, who cares? Sure, he was in the military not long ago. And also, after he left the military, he went on to work for Raytheon, one of the weapons manufacturers and private contractors that has literally a vested interest in more war abroad, endless wars that we're already engaged in. But Michael Eric Dyson doesn't care. He thinks that Lloyd's fantastic because he's black. So let's take a look at what he has to say.
This defense secretary thing is big with General Michael Austin. What do you think?
Oh, it's beautiful. Look, have you ever heard a president say before, I owe you, I owe you a debt, you hook me up, I'm hooking you up. I've never heard a president. I've studied presidential rhetoric. I've studied presidents' interactions with Black America. I've never heard that. And so the attempt to follow up and to follow through by President-elect Joe Biden is worthy of note.
No discussion about the issues with General Austin serving in the military not long ago. No discussion about the fact that he worked for Raytheon. None of that. No discussion about how his vested interests in the military-industrial complex would negatively impact Black men in this country, Black soldiers who are forced to go fight in these wars and risk their lives. No analysis on that. It's all about the aesthetics of change. And that is a problem because it gets sold off as this idea of reform, this idea of creating a better country and a better world. But there's a reason why the foreign policy of Barack Obama was very similar to the foreign policy of George W. Bush. In fact, Barack Obama expanded on that foreign policy. He expanded with drone strikes, the same drone strikes I was talking about earlier, where hundreds of civilians died abroad. And so, again, you can have both things. You can have diversity, which, again, I want to reiterate is important, but the proper representation that's tied with that diversity. But when Joe Biden had an opportunity to actually implement that idea, he actually passed it up. So civil rights leaders and lawmakers like Representative Jim Clyburn were rooting for Representative Marcia Fudge to be nominated for the Agriculture Secretary. And she would actually be a great pick. Not only is she African American, she also fought hard to ensure that we avoided cuts to the food stamp program. She also fought incredibly hard to ensure that there was a better agricultural system and setup to protect Black rural farmers. These are important issues, and I think she would be absolutely fantastic for that role. But as the Intercept reported, Biden decided to pass her up, and he went with Tom Vilsack, who was the agriculture secretary under Barack Obama. They report whereas Fudge represented an opportunity to unite the USDA's rural and urban constituents and address the agency's long history of racial discrimination, Vilsack is a rerun of pro-corporate policies that continue to drive rural communities away from the Democratic Party. And look, this is intentional. This is absolutely intentional. Maybe I'm being too cynical in saying that or thinking that, but there's a reason why Joe Biden chose to put someone like Representative Fudge, who would be a fighter for the things that we need in a completely different position. And so Biden instead, of course, decided to nominate her for Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, which is interesting because just last month she told Politico, as this country becomes more and more diverse, we're going to have to stop looking at only certain agencies as those that people like me fit in. You know, it's always, we want to put the black person in labor or HUD. Oops. And look, this kind of thinking unfortunately impacts well-meaning people as well. And one of the latest examples of that is how Anthony Fauci communicated the efficacy and the safety of the vaccine, the coronavirus vaccine, for, I think, reasonably skeptical Black Americans. And so here's how he addressed that issue.
Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett, or Kizzy Corbett. Kizzy is an African-American scientist who is right at the forefront of the development of the vaccine. So the first thing you might want to say to my African-American brothers and sisters is that the vaccine that you're going to be taking was developed by an African-American woman. And that is just a fact. I mean, that is a fact. And I think that's some of the things that people don't fully appreciate.
I think the messaging has to go beyond identity or the identity of who developed the vaccine to persuade people of its safety and efficacy. And when we get wrapped up in these superficial, surface level discussions about identity, I think we miss the point. I think we fail to address issues and concerns that people legitimately have. And look, Biden's closest staffer, someone who he's worked with since the early 90s, is Cynthia Hogan. And she has been working for Apple ever since the Obama administration's second term ended. She was a lobbyist for Apple, and she fought aggressively to ensure that Donald Trump's tax cuts for the wealthy would pass. Because, of course, those tax cuts, which cut the corporate tax rate, significantly benefited Apple's bottom line. And if she's one of his closest staffers, will we see proper representation of Americans who are slipping deeper and deeper into poverty right now, when we have this system of redistributing wealth from the bottom to the top? And look, the only person that I've seen so far address the issue of representation for progressive ideas was Katie Tur. She's also on MSNBC, and she asked Bernie this question.
Do you feel like there's been enough progressive representation in Joe Biden's cabinet picks?
Well, as I have said many times, the progressive movement in this country is a very significant part of the Democratic coalition. Now, I know some of the folks in the Democratic establishment don't want to recognize it, but that is a fact. And in truth, if it wasn't for the hard work of a lot of progressive grassroots organizations who got young people involved in the political process, working class people involved in a way that we have not seen, Joe Biden would not have won that election. And I think that's pretty clear. And my point has been from day one that those voices, that movement, deserves representation in the cabinet. And if your question is, have I seen that yet? No, I have not.
There is one person that I will point to who seems to be a promising nominee. Now, the question is, will he get confirmed? And that's California's current Attorney General, Javier Becerra, who has been a fighter for Medicare for All. He has certainly fought against austerity in the past when he was a member of the House. And he also has fought against any type of cuts to Social Security, any type of cuts to taxes for the rich. He seems promising, but if you listen to the rhetoric in the media about the possibility of him serving as the HHS secretary, they seem pretty terrified, which makes me think that there is an intentional effort to avoid proper representation for Americans, for working Americans and Americans who are experiencing the downsides, the brunt, all of the issues associated with this pandemic. And that's pretty terrifying because for everyone who was concerned about the toxicity and the disastrous policies coming from the Trump administration, if we have another Obama-Biden administration 2.0 or Biden-Obama administration 2.0, considering all of the cabinet picks who are just going to be recycled for this administration, it really does set the stage for someone who could possibly be worse than Trump, but more importantly, savvier than Trump. So it's just something to think about as these incredibly superficial conversations about representation happen in the mainstream media, in the corporate media. We need to ask, okay, if they represent the way people look in America, do they represent the best interests of people in America? And so far, I think the answer is no.
Yeah, I mean, the more I think about it, and as I get older, I turn against this kind of thing harder and harder. I have like zero patience for it. Like, I mean, Kyrsten Sinema is a perfect example of this. I mean, she was an anti-war activist during the Iraq War. I mean, that's how she kind of came up in politics. She is also bisexual, and by the time she got elected to the Senate, she had already kind of like disavowed all her previous anti-war activism. She came in as one of the most conservative Democrats, probably maybe the most conservative senator after Joe Manchin. And but like when she got elected, people were like all yas queening her because she was the first bisexual member of the Senate. Yeah, and her like swearing in ceremony, she like wore a good outfit or something, and like and I remember thinking like, what is this? Like, yeah, Kyrsten Sinema's swearing in was a bold queer statement. It's like, okay, so she can vote for intersectional drone strikes by selling arms to the UAE. You know what I mean? Like by breaking with her party to do that. Like, what's the point of any of this? And like, there's been like hilarious things. I mean, in a dark way with this kind of weird identitarian struggle for Biden in cabinet positions, because like you see someone like Susan Rice, who is a black woman and who is awful, but to the extent that she does have expertise, I mean, she does have legitimate quote unquote expertise in something. It's in foreign policy, in foreign affairs. Yeah. She was Obama's UN ambassador to the UN. Biden names her to the Domestic Policy Council. Like,
it's insane. What? It's insane.
You know, but they were like running low. They were like they didn't have enough black women, so let's just shove her in there and see. You know what I mean? And just like and shut up all those people that are up in arms about this kind of thing. You know, it's 100% cynical. It has absolutely been primarily used as a weapon against the left, as a weapon against egalitarian universal programs, which are seen are slandered as somehow proto-racist because they're not like race specific in some way, because they would help racist Trump supporters, things like that. Like that is absolutely this representation identity thing has been used as a very effective weapon to stamp down discontent and to destroy the left. And I just have like no patience for it anymore.
Yeah, and look, I'm sure people will disagree with me on that. I can only speak for myself on this as a woman. I find it incredibly insulting when the conversation is, we need a woman in this position, right? It's not even a discussion about who the woman is, whether she'd be qualified to do the job. We're not a monolith. No. We're not all qualified for the same things. And it's just this tokenizing that it really insults me. I hate it. And so I want genuine equality. I want to be able to compete with my male peers and prove that I do a better job and get the position. That's the way I want to do it. And I don't want to get anything. I mean, nothing's been handed to me because I, work on the left, but you get what I'm saying? Like it's not a good feeling to know that you got the upper hand because of the superficial identity rhetoric that's taking place right now. And it is used in so many cynical ways. And it's very counterproductive because it plays into this idea of dividing and conquering, especially with what you referred to with universal programs and how they seem to be against it.
And back to like the discussion of Michael at the beginning of the show, like I understand why a lot of regular people kind of buy into this kind of thing. I understand why people would love to see, people who look like them in positions of power and, at the Oscars ceremony and things like that. I understand that genuine impulse, but it's been used and weaponized by the people in power against those people, against their own interest. So it's fundamentally anti-solidaristic. It creates a situation in which people have talked about it, like the oppression Olympics, like, oh, because I checked these 3 boxes, I am actually more qualified to talk about this kind of issue than you are, because it gets very, very, you go down very, very weird rabbit holes if you take those kind of that kind of thing to its logical conclusion.
Yeah, and my whole point is diversity is important. It's just how it's being implemented, right? Because I do think that when you think about the left and when you think about people who actually want to represent working Americans, working people, that is a diverse group of people. It's just that the establishment refuses to in any way help them, find themselves in positions of power, right?
Yeah.
They don't allow those people to have any influence. And that's the issue.
Yeah.
I think Representative Marcia Fudge and how Biden chose her to serve if she gets confirmed in HUD is like, that's a perfect example.
Yeah.
You think he doesn't know, or you think the transition team doesn't know what Marcia Fudge's record is when it comes to agricultural issues and food stamps? They know, and there's a very real reason why they decided to put her in HUD and refuse to nominate her for the agriculture department.
Yeah.